The morning air over Seoul smelled like money and blood. At a rooftop charity gala hosted by the city's most dangerous elite, no one noticed the man standing at the edge of the terrace until he leaned forward. His eyes were empty, his champagne glass tilted. One step, and the most feared man in all of East Asia would simply cease to exist. No one would stop him. No one even dared look directly at him. But she looked. She always looked at the things everyone else ignored. And when Amanda's hand shot out and grabbed the sleeve of a stranger's black suit, yanking him back from the ledge with every ounce of her strength, she had no idea she had just saved the devil himself and ruined her own perfectly ordinary life forever. Welcome to Afrokorean romance, where love has no borders. If you believe in love, please like, share, and subscribe for more Afrokorean romance stories. The party had started at 10 in the morning, which felt obscene to Amanda. A rooftop sunrise gala. That was what the embossed invitation had called it. She'd received it by accident. Her modeling agency had double-booked her with a high-fashion brand that was sponsoring the event, and so here she was, standing among Seoul's wealthiest humans in a gown that cost more than 3 months of her rent, holding sparkling water she hadn't asked for, surrounded by conversations she didn't belong to. The rooftop of the Kwon Tower was breathtaking. Glass balustrades lined the edges, and beyond them, the entire skyline of Seoul glittered even in daylight, a sea of glass and steel and ambition. Tables draped in white linen held towers of flowers the color of champagne. A string quartet played in the corner. Laughter floated through the air like smoke, polished and performative. Amanda stood near the railing, watching the city below rather than the people around her. She was used to being in spaces like this. Modeling had placed her in penthouses, runways, and galleries from Lagos to London to Tokyo. But she never quite felt like she belonged. She was always the most beautiful woman in the room and the loneliest. She was wearing midnight blue, a structured gown that curved with her, not against her. Her skin was deep and luminous in the morning light, and the silver earrings she'd chosen caught every glimmer around her. More than one guest had stared. She'd learned to stare back until they looked away first. That was when she saw him. He was standing at the far corner of the terrace, separated from the rest of the crowd by some invisible but absolute distance. Everyone seemed to orbit around him without getting too close, like planets respecting the gravity of a sun they were terrified of. He was tall, lean but broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit so sharp it looked like it had been cut from darkness itself. His face was angular and coldly beautiful, the kind of face that belonged on ancient paintings of emperors. His jaw was set. His eyes, dark, deep, unfathomable, were fixed on the city below. And his body was tilted forward. Just slightly, just enough. Amanda's breath snagged in her chest. She didn't think. She moved. Her heels clicked fast across the marble tiles, weaving between guests who barely registered her urgency, and her hand shot out and grabbed his sleeve, firm, insistent, yanking him back with a force that surprised even her. He turned. The look on his face was not gratitude. It was not embarrassment. It was something cold and carved, like a man interrupted mid-thought, and then, for just one fraction of a second, something shifted in his eyes. Something cracked open. Something that had not moved in a very long time suddenly stirred. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was low, measured, and dangerous. Korean accented English, each word dropped like a stone. Amanda did not let go of his sleeve. "I could ask you the same thing." They stared at each other. The string quartet played on. The laughter floated. The city stretched out behind him, indifferent and glittering. "I was looking at the view," he said. "People who are just looking at the view don't lean like that." His jaw tightened. A muscle flickered beneath his cheekbone. He was unused to being spoken to this way. That much was obvious. His entire posture radiated authority so total it had probably never been questioned in his life. And yet, he did not pull away from her grip. "You should release my arm," he said quietly, "before someone sees you." "Let them see." She released him not because he asked, but because she was done making her point. She stepped back and smoothed her gown and looked up at him with eyes that were steady and searching. "Are you all right?" The question seemed to land somewhere unexpected. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did, a flinch so internal it was almost invisible. "I don't know you," he said. "No," she agreed, "you don't." She turned and walked away. She did not look back. She didn't know why. Something told her that looking back would be the most dangerous thing she could do. She was right. Because behind her, Han Seung-jun, chairman of the Seoul Group, commander of the most powerful underground syndicate in East and Southeast Asia, a man whose name was spoken in whispers in 4 countries and in fear in 12 more, stood completely still and watched her walk away. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt something. Later that morning, Amanda was back in the agency's dressing room, peeling off the borrowed gown and trying to process the strange encounter. She told herself it meant nothing. Rich, powerful men had moments of darkness. She'd seen it before. She'd intervened because it was the human thing to do, and then she'd walked away because getting involved with men like that was a door she never opened. She had a shoot at noon. An editorial for a Korean fashion magazine, clean and architectural, the kind of work she was good at. She focused on that. She did not think about his eyes. She absolutely did not think about the way he'd looked at her, like she was a window in a room that had been sealed for years. The shoot went well. By evening, she was back at her apartment in Mapogu, a modest but warm space she'd made entirely her own Nigerian Ankara fabric over the couch. A gallery wall of photographs from every city she'd lived in, dried flowers and a clay vase her mother had sent from home. She made tea. She read. She slept. She did not dream about him. She dreamed about him. The next day, a black car was parked outside her building when she left for a morning fitting. She noticed it the way you notice things that don't belong, too still, too expensive, too deliberate. The windows were tinted. The license plate was private. She kept walking and didn't look back. At the fitting, her agency director, Ms. Park, pulled her aside with barely contained excitement. "You've been requested," she whispered, pressing her manicured hands together. "For an exclusive campaign, private client, top tier. They're asking for you specifically." Amanda frowned. "Who's the client?" Ms. Park hesitated. "Seoul Group." The name landed like a weight. Amanda had been in Seoul long enough to know what the Seoul Group was on the surface. A conglomerate that touched fashion, architecture, real estate, and technology. A dynasty. She had also been in Seoul long enough to hear the other things people said in quieter voices. That the Seoul Group had roots that went far deeper than any boardroom. That Han Seung-jun had built his empire on foundations that the law couldn't touch, not because it hadn't tried, but because the law had learned not to. "I'll think about it," Amanda said. Ms. Park looked like she might faint. "Amanda, this is..." "I said I'll think about it." She thought about it the entire walk home. She thought about his eyes at the ledge. She thought about the way his arm had felt under her hand, solid, real, warm, despite everything cold about him. She thought about the fraction of a second when something had cracked in his expression. She called Ms. Park that evening and said yes. She told herself it was professional. 3 days later, Amanda arrived at the Seoul Tower, a monolithic spire in Gangnam that made the other buildings around it look like they were bowing. The lobby was marble and glass, and the kind of silence that only extreme wealth could buy. She was escorted by 2 aides in matching gray suits to the 42nd floor, where a sleek studio had been set up with lighting rigs, wardrobe racks, and a team of stylists who all looked at her with the particular admiration of professionals who recognized real beauty. She had just settled into the makeup chair when the room shifted. It was subtle. The temperature didn't change. The lighting didn't change. But every person in the room straightened, almost imperceptibly, and the conversations quieted as though a silent signal had passed through the air. Han Seung-jun walked in. He was in all black again, different suit, same controlled, devastating silhouette. His hair was dark and swept back. His expression was exactly as unreadable as it had been on the rooftop. He scanned the room once, methodically, and then his eyes found her. They stayed there. Amanda kept her gaze on the mirror in front of her and let the makeup artist continue working on her eyes. He crossed the room. He stopped beside her chair, not in front, not at a distance, but just beside, close enough that she could feel the quiet authority radiating from him. "Ms. Amanda," he said. "Mr. Han," she met his gaze in the mirror. "Nice studio. I had it built for this shoot." She blinked. The whole studio. The whole floor. He said it without arrogance, just fact, the way people state things they've never had reason to question. "I wanted the conditions to be right." She turned in the chair and looked up at him directly. "Why me?" "You were the only person at that gala," he said slowly, "who looked at me like I was a person." The room was very quiet. The makeup artist had found somewhere else to be. Amanda held his gaze. There was nothing manipulative in his expression, nothing charming or calculated. Just that same raw, unguarded thing she'd seen for one split second at the ledge. It was more frightening than his power. It was more dangerous than his reputation. "That's not a reason to book a model," she said. "No," he agreed, "but it's a reason to want to see her again." The silence stretched. "I'll do the job," Amanda said carefully, "but only the job." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but the memory of one. "Of course," he said, and left. The shoot lasted 2 days. On the first day, Amanda worked with the creative team on a campaign that was clean, powerful, and visually stunning: structured suits, architectural jewelry, a Korean-Nigerian fusion aesthetic that felt genuinely beautiful rather than tokenistic. She was good at this. She lost herself in it. Han Seung-jun observed from the edge of the studio, not intrusively, just present, a quiet, watchful stillness that she tried very hard not to be aware of. She failed. Every time she moved, she felt his attention like a physical thing, not predatory, not objectifying, more like reverence, like watching something he couldn't explain but couldn't look away from. On the second day, one of the junior photographers, a young Korean man with too much charm and not enough sense, spent the entire lunch break flirting with Amanda. He was harmless, and she handled it with easy grace, laughing at the right moments and steering the conversation back to work without making him feel foolish. Across the room, she saw Han Seung-jun go very still. She saw his hand, which had been loosely holding a document, close around it completely. She saw the temperature behind his eyes drop about 3 degrees. The photographer was reassigned to a different project by end of day. No explanation given. Amanda looked at Han Seung-jun across the studio and raised an eyebrow. He looked back at her with an expression of perfect innocence that was entirely unconvincing. She shook her head. She did not smile. She absolutely smiled, just with her eyes, just for a second before she looked away. That evening, a car arrived to take her home. She hadn't arranged one. Inside was a single white peony in a crystal holder and a folded note that read, in precise handwriting, "The city is not safe at night. This is not an order. It is a preference." Amanda stared at the flower for a long time. She took the car. Over the following week, things arrived. Not extravagantly, not diamonds or declarations. A coat because she'd mentioned in passing that she was cold. Her favorite Nigerian tea, the kind that was nearly impossible to find in Seoul, sitting on her doorstep in a cloth bag. A new portfolio case because she'd mentioned offhand that hers was falling apart. No cards, no names, but she always knew. She called Ms. Park. "Tell the Seung group I said thank you, and tell them to stop." Ms. Park called back an hour later, visibly distressed. "He says, and I'm quoting, 'She can tell me herself.'" Amanda closed her eyes. She went to the tower. She had not been invited this time. She simply appeared at the 42nd floor reception and said, "Tell him Amanda is here." She was shown into his office before she finished the sentence, which told her everything she needed to know about how anticipated her arrival was. His office was enormous and spare floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides, a city that worshipped him spread out below. A desk that held only a laptop and a single framed photograph she was too far away to see. He was standing when she entered, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the forearm, and he looked for just a moment like a man who had been waiting. "You have to stop," she said. "Stop what?" "The car, the coat, The tea, Han Seung-jun, do you know how hard Nigerian leaf tea is to source in Seoul? I know exactly how hard it is, he said. I had someone looking for 3 days. She opened her mouth, closed it. Sit down, Amanda. I'm not staying. Then stand. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city. I'm not trying to buy you. I know that's what it looks like. It's not. Then what is it? He was quiet for a moment. When he turned, his face held that expression again, the cracked open one, the one that cost him something. The morning you grabbed my arm, he said slowly. I had been standing at that railing for 11 minutes. No one spoke to me. No one came near me, not out of respect, out of fear. I had forgotten what it felt like for someone to reach for me without a reason. He paused. You had no reason. The room was very quiet. I have a reason now, Amanda said softly, and that's exactly why I need you to stop. What reason? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The air between them was doing all the answering. He took one step toward her, just one, measured, careful, like he was approaching something he was afraid to startle. Have dinner with me, he said. No. Lunch. No. Coffee. She looked at him for a long time. The city blazed behind him. He stood very still, like a man who had learned to hold himself under enormous pressure, and was, for the first time, choosing not to. One coffee, she said, not a date. Of course not, he said, and the ghost of that almost smile was back. She left before it could become real. But she was already thinking about what to wear. The coffee happened at a small, quiet place in Insadong, his choice, which surprised her. She'd expected somewhere sleek and intimidating. This was low-ceilinged and warm, smelling of roasted beans and old wood, full of artists and students who didn't know or care who he was. He was there when she arrived, already seated, already holding a plain black coffee, looking faintly out of place in a room this human-sized, and yet somehow more real than she'd seen him. They talked for 2 hours. She learned that he had studied law before the weight of his family's legacy, and the darker truth of what that legacy really was had pulled him onto a different path. That he had a younger sister he was quietly putting through medical school in Edinburgh, and that he called her every Sunday and pretended, for those 30 minutes, to be just a brother. That he had not laughed, genuinely laughed, in a very long time, and that the first time he did, sitting across from Amanda in Insadong while she described a modeling catastrophe in Milan involving a runaway llama and a designer's hat collection, it startled them both. She learned he was watching her like she was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen up close. She told him about Lagos, about her mother who sold fabric in the market and made every piece of clothing Amanda owned until she was 16, about getting scouted at 17 and the terror of leaving, about how Seoul had felt like a second home and a foreign country at once, about how she had learned to take up space in rooms that weren't built for her, and how that had made her both stronger and lonelier than she'd expected. He listened with his full attention, not politely, fully, like every word she said was being memorized. When they stood to leave, he held her coat for her. It was a small gesture, almost old-fashioned. She felt it everywhere. Outside, on the narrow street, they stood for a moment in the cool morning air. People moved past them. Neither moved. This wasn't a date, she reminded him. I know, he said. Good. Same time next week, he asked. She looked at him. His face was still controlled, still composed, but his eyes were asking something much larger than the question. Maybe, she said. She walked away. She made it exactly 4 steps before she heard him, quietly, to himself. Maybe. As if it were the best thing anyone had said to him in years. The weeks that followed were the strangest and most quietly wonderful of Amanda's life in Seoul. They met for coffee every week, and then twice a week, and then the coffees became walks, and the walks became long afternoon conversations in the back of his car while the city moved past the windows. She learned his rhythms, the slight tension that gathered at his jaw when something troubled him, the way his hand would drift toward hers on a tabletop without ever quite landing, the controlled stillness that fractured into something warmer when she made him laugh. He never pushed. He never demanded. He simply showed up consistently, quietly, absolutely, and she found herself arranging her days around the spaces where he might appear. She hated how natural it felt. She hated how much she wanted it. One morning, she arrived at a fitting to find that a troublesome client, a designer who had been publicly rude to her at a previous show, the kind of rudeness that had cultural weight behind it, the kind people pretended not to notice, had quietly, mysteriously, lost his venue for his upcoming Seoul showcase. His sponsors had dissolved. His bookings had evaporated. Amanda said nothing to Han Seung-jun that evening. She simply looked at him across the table at their coffee spot and said, "You should know that I fight my own battles." He met her eyes. "I know you do." "Then why?" "Because knowing you can fight your own battles," he said quietly, "doesn't mean you should have to fight everyone alone." She looked at him for a long time. She did not tell him to stop. The danger arrived on a Tuesday. Amanda was walking from a studio in Hongdae when a black car she didn't recognize slowed beside her. She kept walking. It slowed again. A window rolled down, and a man she'd never seen, heavy, suited with the particular blankness of professional menace, said, in English that was careful and deliberate, "Mr. Han's Associates would like a word." "Tell Mr. Han's Associates to call my agency," she said, and kept walking. The car didn't follow. But that night, her apartment buzzer sounded 3 times after midnight, and when she looked through the peephole, no one was there. She found a white envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a photograph of her, taken that afternoon, walking in Hongdae. On the back, a single line in Korean that her translation app rendered as, "Stay away from what isn't yours." Her hands were steady when she photographed it. Her heart was not. She called Han Seung-jun. He answered on the first ring, despite the hour. "Someone's been watching me," she said. She read him the message. The silence on the other end was the most frightening silence she had ever heard, not because it was empty, but because of what was coiling inside it. "Don't open the door to anyone tonight," he said. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something ancient and absolute. "Not anyone, I'm sending someone." "Seung-jun." Amanda, her name in his mouth, the way he said it, like it was the only word in the language that mattered. "Please." She didn't argue. Within 20 minutes, 2 of his people were outside her door, a man and a woman, both calm and professional, who told her they would be there until further notice and asked if she needed anything. She asked for tea. They produced it. Han Seung-jun arrived at 4 in the morning. She opened the door before he could knock, because she'd been sitting in the hallway for the last hour without quite admitting to herself that she was waiting for him. He stepped in, and she saw immediately that he had not slept and had no intention of sleeping. His jacket was off, his shirt collar open, and there was something in his expression that cut her straight through, not danger, not command, but something raw and terrible and helpless. He stopped in the middle of her living room and looked at her whole self, checking, confirming, and something in him released. "I know who sent it," he said. "Who?" "A man named Choi Byung-soo. He runs a competing syndicate based in Busan. He's been looking for leverage against me for 2 years. He paused. "He thinks you are leverage." The words settled over her like cold water. "Because of me," he said, and his voice fractured just slightly. "You're in danger because of me." Amanda looked at him across her small, warm, photo-covered living room. In the soft light, surrounded by her mother's fabric and her own collected memories of every city she'd ever loved, Han Seung-jun looked like a man carrying the weight of everything he'd ever built and having it for the first time. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She brought tea, her Nigerian leaf tea, the kind he'd sourced for 3 days. She sat across from him. They drank in silence for a while. "I'll relocate you," he said. "Somewhere safe, somewhere Byung-soo can't." "No." "Amanda." "No." Her voice was quiet but absolute. "I'm not going to hide. That's not who I am." He looked at her. His jaw was tight. She She could see the war in him, the part that wanted to wrap her in steel and the part that recognized with reluctant awe that she would not be wrapped. "Then I'll handle Byung-soo," he said. "How?" He didn't answer. She didn't ask again. Some questions, she was learning, had answers that lived in the darker parts of the world, and some things were safer to love without fully knowing. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He went very still. "Don't get yourself killed either," she said. He turned his hand under hers and held on. The following days were tense in ways she felt in her bones. Han Seung-jun was everywhere and nowhere. She'd catch glimpses of his car outside the studio, hear from his people that everything was fine, receive short messages that said nothing alarming and communicated a great deal. "Ate yet? Don't take the east route today. The shoot ran long, I saw. You looked beautiful." She saved every one. Meanwhile, Byung-soo's pressure escalated. Someone leaked photos of Amanda and Seung-jun to a tabloid, candid shots from Insadong. From the car, nothing scandalous but everything implied. The headlines screamed about the Mafia chairman and his foreign girlfriend. Her agency called in a panic. Brands that had been interested went quiet. 2 bookings were canceled. Amanda sat in her apartment and looked at the stories spreading across the internet and felt, for the first time since she'd arrived in Seoul years ago, the cold particular ache of being made into a story instead of a person. She called Seung-jun. He answered immediately. "I've seen it," he said before she spoke. "My bookings. I'll fix it." "Seung-jun, I don't want you to fix it. I want—" She stopped. She pressed her hand to her forehead. "I want to know if this is going to keep happening, if being around you is going to keep costing me things." The silence was long. "Yes," he said, honest, brutal. "It might." She closed her eyes. "But I would spend the rest of my life making sure it cost you less than it gave you back," he said quietly. "If you let me." She was crying before she knew she was going to. Quietly, the way she cried, the way she'd always cried, trying not to take up too much emotional space, a habit born of years of being the strong one, the capable one, the one who kept moving. "Amanda," his voice was soft and undone, "I'm coming over." "You don't have to. I'm already in the car." He arrived in 12 minutes. She opened the door with dry eyes and a composed face that didn't fool him for a single second. He stepped in and stood before her and simply opened his arms. She stood there for 3 long seconds. Then she walked into them. He held her the way she had always secretly wanted to be held, completely, with his full attention, like she was something worth protecting but also worth trusting with his own weight. She felt him breathe. She felt the controlled tension in him give, just slightly, in a way she understood was not something he offered freely. They stayed like that for a long time. "I'm scared," she admitted into his shoulder. "I know." "Not of Byung-soo." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "Of this, of you, of how fast this is." He looked at her with his whole face, not guarded, not composed, just him. "I know," he said again, softer. "I'm terrified of it too." She searched his eyes. "You, terrified?" "I have stood in rooms where men put guns on the table and felt nothing." He lifted one hand and touched her face, just his fingertips, at her jaw, like she was something he needed to be careful with. "You look at me and I feel everything." The world outside fell away. What happened next was not spoken, not declared. It was the accumulated weight of every charged silence, every almost touch, every morning that had felt different because he was in it. The city outside, his glass skyline, could burn to the ground, and neither of them would have noticed. The scene fades, as some things must, into warmth and closeness, and the kind of quiet that only comes when 2 people finally stop running from each other. She woke before dawn. And for one devastating moment, everything was warm and certain. And then the thoughts came. He is the most dangerous man in Asia. People are already trying to use you against him. Your career is at risk. You are a model from Lagos who stumbled into something you cannot survive. He will realize that. He will wake up and realize that. And then what will you do when Han Seung-jun decides that Amanda is not worth the complication? She dressed quietly, in the dim blue pre-dawn light. She moved with the careful silence of someone leaving a place they love precisely because they love it. She picked up her bag. She looked at him, sleeping for the first time with the kind of stillness that wasn't vigilance but rest, and something in her chest cracked cleanly in two. She left. She went to the one place she always went when the world became too much, the Han River. She sat on a bench at the water's edge as the sun began to color the sky, and she let herself feel it. The ache of choosing to walk away from the only person who had ever made her feel, in the middle of all his darkness, entirely seen. She pulled out her phone. There were already 3 missed calls from Seung-jun. And then 3 more. And then a voice message. She pressed it to her ear. His voice was low and careful and stripped of every layer of control he usually wore. I woke up and you were gone. I don't. A pause. Amanda, wherever you are, I need you to know that I have never in my life woken up and needed to know someone was safe the way I need to know you're safe right now. Call me back, please. She was crying again, silently watching the river. Her phone buzzed. A text, I know you're afraid, I am too, but please don't do this alone, you don't have to anymore. Another buzz. I looked at your empty side of the room for 6 minutes. It was the longest 6 minutes of my life, and I have survived things that should have killed me. Another, I'm looking for you. She looked up. Down the riverbank, maybe 200 meters away, Han Seung-jun was walking toward her. He had clearly left in a hurried jacket over a shirt not fully buttoned, no tie, hair not yet composed. He was scanning the path with the focused urgency of a man who had torn the city apart to find what mattered. He saw her. He stopped. They looked at each other across the open morning air, the river silver beside them, the city waking up around them, ordinary and indifferent. He walked to her. He sat down beside her on the bench. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak immediately. I thought you'd decided I wasn't worth the trouble, she said quietly. Amanda, he turned to face her. His eyes were sleepless and fully open, nothing hidden. I had my lawyers working all night. The tabloid story is being retracted. The brands that dropped you will be calling your agency before noon, not because I threatened anyone, but because I showed them the cost of making that mistake. He paused. Your career is not a casualty of being near me. I won't allow that. She stared at him. I also had Choi Byung-soo's operation dismantled last night. He said it plainly, without drama. He won't be sending photographs or anything else for a very long time. She blinked. How? He had 17 outstanding violations that my legal team had been sitting on. He thought I was too proud to use them. A quiet, cold satisfaction crossed his face. He was wrong. She looked at the water. Her throat was tight. Seung-jun. I'm not done. She looked back at him. I have been the most powerful person in every room I have ever entered since I was 24 years old, he said, and I have been alone in all of them. I built an empire and I stood at a ledge because I couldn't think of one single thing in it that needed me to stay. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his voice low and unhurried and devastating. And then a woman in a midnight blue dress grabbed my arm like I was worth holding onto. And everything in my life that I thought was finished started. Amanda's hand was pressed to her mouth. Her eyes were full. I'm not asking you to be unafraid, he said. I'm asking you to be afraid and stay anyway, the way you always do. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced not a ring box, not yet, but a small brass key on a simple cord. This is to my home, not the tower, my actual home in Seongbukdong, where I keep the photograph of my sister, where I make tea badly and watch old films and exist without an audience. He set the key on the bench between them. I want you to exist there too. The sun was fully risen now. The river moved. Amanda picked up the key. She held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time. I'm not easy, she told him. I know. I argue. Constantly. I take up a lot of space. Good, he said. My house is too quiet. She laughed, a wet, full, real laugh, the kind that breaks through all the walls at once. He looked at her like she was the sunrise. He looked at her like the ledge had never existed. She reached out and took his hand. The months that followed were the building of something. He took her to his home in Seongbukdong, a place nothing like the tower, warm and low and full of books and the photograph of his sister she finally got to see. A young woman with his cheekbones and a wide, easy smile, holding a stethoscope and laughing at the camera. Amanda stood before it for a long time. "She looks like kindness," Amanda said. "She is," he said. "She doesn't know about most of what I am." "She probably knows more than you think," Amanda said. "Sisters usually do." He called his sister that Sunday, and for the first time when the call ended, he said, "I want you to meet someone." His sister's response, conveyed later, gleefully, through a series of voice messages, was a series of increasingly dramatic exclamations that Amanda gathered translated roughly to finally. "Finally, I have been praying for this. What does she look like? I'm coming home immediately." Han Seung-jun sat on his couch listening to his sister's voice messages with an expression of enormous, helpless, genuine happiness, and Amanda sat beside him and thought, there he is. There is the person underneath all of it, and I found him at a ledge at a sunrise party and I held on. The ring came on a night that was not staged or spectacular. They were at home. She was reading. He was working at the desk across the room, or pretending to. She had noticed over the months that he watched her the way some people watch fires, with the particular absorption of someone who has been cold for a very long time and cannot quite believe the warmth is real. He came and sat beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his plain gray house clothes, not a suit, not armor, just himself, and placed a ring on the page of her book. Simple, architectural, perfectly exactly her. "I already know your answer," he said quietly, without arrogance, with certainty, the certainty of a man who had spent months learning every room of her. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. "Do you?" she said. Yes. He was watching her with that open face, the one that only lived at home, the one that had nothing left to protect. "But I want to hear it anyway." She picked up the ring. She put it on. "Yes," she said. He exhaled, like something that had been held under pressure for years finally, fully released. He took her face in his hands, and he kissed her like a man who had been standing at a ledge and chose, this time, to step back. They were married in the spring. Not a dynasty wedding, not the kind Seoul expected of the Seung name. A private ceremony, 60 people, Seongbukdong garden in full bloom. His sister flew in from Edinburgh and cried through the entire ceremony and apologized to absolutely no one. Amanda's mother came from Lagos in a gown of vibrant Ankara, the most magnificent woman in the garden, and she held Han Seung-jun's face in her hands when she met him and looked at him for a long time and said in Yoruba something that Amanda translated as, "You have good eyes. They're afraid of nothing. That's rare." He didn't speak Yoruba, but something in the warmth of her hands communicated everything the words held, and he bowed to her with a sincerity so complete that Amanda's mother nodded and said, in English, "Good. Welcome to the family. Don't make me regret it." "Never," he said, and meant it. Amanda walked to him across the garden in ivory and gold, curvy and luminous and radiant with the particular glow of a woman who has stopped apologizing for taking up space and started filling it fully. He watched her come toward him and made no attempt whatsoever to compose his face. She reached him. She took his hands. "You're crying," she whispered. "I'm not," he said, and the tears were absolutely on his face. She laughed and he laughed, and the garden applauded, and the spring light fell over all of it like a blessing. 6 months later, Amanda stood at the window of their home in Seongbukdong with a small white box in her hands and a look on her face that he read, when he came in and found her there, in under a second. He crossed the room. He stood before her. She held up the test. He looked at it. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, not the ancient, cold authority he was known for, not the controlled power that had made empires afraid of him. Something completely new. Something that had no armor and needed none. Something that was, in the most precise possible sense, new life. He sat down on the window seat, slowly, like his legs had remembered what it felt like to be human. She sat beside him. She put her head on his shoulder. He put his arm around her and held on. Outside, Seoul moved through its morning, ordinary, brilliant, indifferent, alive. Inside, Han Seung-jun, the most feared man in East Asia, the man who had stood at a ledge and been pulled back by a stranger in midnight blue, pressed his lips to his wife's temple and said, very quietly, in a voice that had never sounded like this before, "Thank you for grabbing my arm." Amanda closed her eyes. "Thank you for not pulling away," she said. The city blazed outside. And inside that warm, quiet, book-filled room, in a house that had finally learned what it felt like to be a home, love had won. Not easily, not without cost, not without fire and fear and the kind of danger that leaves marks, but fully, finally, completely. Some things are built over lifetimes. Some things begin at a ledge at sunrise, when a stranger's hand reaches out, and the world changes.